So the idea here is putting together a research panel. It's different from the panel. This is more of a fireside chat. The reason is like we just thought like it would be cool, this kind of bizarre kind of approach that we take in ecosystem. There is always a diverse set of actors approaching the same problems in different ways. But it would be nice to have those ideas to get, propagated public. So you can always take, when it actually comes up, oh, there was a reference and these are people talking. But also like when we talk about an effort, a collective effort, it also need to have multiple sides, right? There's a research thought, there's an economic side, there's a security side, there's also tooling side. It's not like one thought will get accepted immediately. Perhaps it will accelerate, Maybe the EIP process shouldn't take like 2 years. It can accelerate. It builds confidence in the ecosystem. This is what we think, because we're an engineering team, so we just speak our engineering language. We don't do other things. So let's begin. So everyone have 2 questions and something related to what you're doing, so you can share their thoughts and then others can intervene, or people can ask questions. So it's very interactive. Relaxed, fun conversation. Cool. So before we begin, let's introduce ourselves. So myself, I'm Matt. I'm the CEO of Blockswap Labs, which means the chief coffee maker in the team. Do a bunch of things. But we do a lot of infrastructure-related toolings for Ethereum. That's our 99% of work. Mostly spend consensus layer and execution layer communication. And now we're spending more time on parallel state replication, like execution, things like that. Many things will stay in the research, but some of the things actually will translate into products. So we are a company focused on research in production rather than pushing papers. We just actually want to have this kind of feedback loop immediately. So we also core contribute to a couple of projects and other clients. Blockswap Network and Proof of Neutrality are the 2 projects that we do it. One deals with the staking, another one deals with the MEV infrastructure. Again, thank you. Philip?
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm Philip. I'm with 20 Squares. So we are basically an economic auditing company. We look at typically initial products and try to analyze them. As we saw in the talk before, we focus on a specific aspect, try to make sense whether this is actually economically viable. We use our own tooling that you saw also a bit before. That tooling is actually, thanks to the Ethereum Foundation, now further developed, and we're aiming to develop that into a general game theoretic modeling framework that basically everyone can use, so it's open source. One of the aspects that is interesting about that general approach is its compositionality. So we see a lot of actors and research team doing very good work on specific parts. What we are trying to do is basically have a framework in which we can also combine these things and see the interaction between components, which we believe is very important also in the general PBS value chain. It's not enough to look at just one isolated aspect. You need to think about how 2 layers of the value chain are actually interacting.
Yeah, great intro. My name is Barnabé Monod. I'm a researcher at the Robust Incentives Group. It's a research team of the Ethereum Foundation. We are mostly focused on mechanism design, game theory, protocol, crypto economics. There are 2 other research teams at the foundation. One is more crypto, one is more consensus. But there tends to be like maybe some overlap and a lot of cross-pollination between teams. I've been spending now 3.5 years at the foundation. I've looked at things like EIP 1559, proof of stake, and now PBS is, I would say, most of the time I waste on these days. It's a lot of problems. It has a lot of layers, like Philip described. So yeah, a very interesting question in my opinion.
Nice. So I'm Juan Conejero, a formal verification engineer, Runtime verification. So basically we do audits and formal verification engagements. We have a very strong line of research with a very interesting topic called the blockchain of truth, which you may want to check out. I'm not going to give a conference now here, but very interesting topics with research as well. So yeah, mainly what I do at Runtime verification is on the one hand, like look at code of protocols and say where things go wrong. and on the other hand also participate in formal verification engagements, which basically comes to apply our core technology, which is K, which is this operational semantics framework that has a lot of nice properties, and basically allows you to do symbolic execution. So yeah, these other kind of engagements that instead of looking at code and say, here goes bug, we try to like come up with nice specs and prove that our client's code basically meets a good specification of their protocol.
Thank you. So let's kick it off. So I'll go from you. Let's do it. I know you guys are pretty much verifying systems with a lot of MEV actors, including ourselves, but like you have seen all kind of approaches.
No comment.
Yeah, no comment. All right, cool. I get it. But the thing is, the OFA, order flow auctions, who gets what, and how this is getting conducted. Like, are you working on the order flow auction framework from an open games? If that is the case, what would be that look like?
Okay, let me actually do some advertising for a talk that Fabrizio gave about that on Monday. So what we basically have been doing, the compositional model helps to identify Lego blocks that you can reuse. And one idea we had in the past weeks, months, is basically, in the context of PBS, let's try to identify these specific components where actors are actually interacting with both sides of the market. They are basically, let's say, you're receiving a bid because you're acting as an auctioneer or as a marketplace, but at the same time you also have to collect these bids to be upstream participating in an auction or a marketplace. And the idea basically is to have these components to be able to assemble a model, or at least a relevant part of that value chain, and see how the interaction flows through. So one thing we have done, there are many aspects to look at, but one thing we looked at, for instance, what if there is exclusive order flow? How does this actually affect and interact with the builders in a market and basically propose on the top side of that framework? And at that stage, this is research, but we are kind of first verifying that actually certain things we take for granted are actually making sense. Similar to what we did actually for work with you, that certain things seem intuitive, but unless you have a formal model and actually check it, you still can be wrong, right? And in that case, what we see is this interaction between, for instance, users naturally spreading all, or basically sending their bids, their intents to everyone because they want to make sure it gets included. The second component is of that, if there is exclusive order flow, then it's important, is it actually valuable for the specific builders? And lastly, what seems very hard is actually the role of receiving bids, and then basically having to reason about what should I bid upstream, right? And what do you do if you get the capacity or you don't get the capacity? This is the thing we are exploring at the moment. This is still, I would say, toy level, but the general approach we take is that if you have the toy level, it sounds like toilet level, sorry, toy level, toy level model, you can actually use it to extend it and expand it, basically.
So what this means that anyone who is doing kind of bids, how they can use such a system? Are they going to learn about your framework, or they just look like do's and don'ts? What does it look like for outsiders?
So for outsiders, it could be actually just what I mentioned before, is you have specific aspects that get looked at, for instance, how an auction format on the order flow actually works. But then there is the next question, what does the builder do with it? So one thing, it could be kind of almost like a public canvas that you can see how actually things fit together, right? It could be almost really like a research governance tool that you can look at. Is it actually making sense if this interaction is like that? Are claims that we do between these systems actually work? We're also talking to different players who could use that kind of modeling for their specific part they focus on. I think in PBS, Wannabe obviously knows more about that. There are more components coming, and there is a question of when do these components come in. I think there is a need for people to simulate and understand what happens if that thing is in place. How will it affect themselves, basically?
Right. Okay. Any questions, guys? You can ask, because there is no problem. Indirect. Anything that you want to ask, just ask. Right. Wannabe, then I want to take the next one to you. You wrote an article, let's say, and then it was a Substack, so? Yeah, right. But it's a very elegant scheme called Pepsi. Sweet. And
it took me a while too.
Yeah. And very nice. what do you think, like, when we were writing that one? So it's about 11 months now, right? So you finished that, and then there's a lot of conversation around that, and there's obviously, like, iterations. We took a lot of things from Pepsi too, so thank you for that. So can you explain why Pepsi? How, when you write that, what was that? The general ecosystem demand for such a thing, that when you do it, if you can share that thoughts, would be great, and what it is, maybe people can know, right?
Sounds good. So yeah, it's a tall order, I would say, because to understand Pepsi, probably I need to talk a bit about PBS first, which probably is better understood at this point. It's been live for some time. But the idea of PBS, and really like the idea of a lot of infrastructure that we're seeing developed today outside of a protocol, is the idea that the protocol is limited and you want to build stuff that comes to fill these gaps. But the stuff you build, the protocol has no idea what's going on. So it's obviously going to have trouble controlling for failure modes that may be very systemic and put us in a very bad situation. It may have very misaligned incentive between what the operators want and what the protocol wants. And so you're really trying to, when you think about like protocol development, how do you ensure that you have a somewhat manageable amount of complexity at the protocol layer, but also you have enough to, let's say, have a healthy ecosystem that's blossoming around it. And one of the main criticism I've seen around PBS, and I think it's probably true to some extent, is the idea that it's kind of a very crude scheme. So you're saying, I'm a proposer, I'm staked to Ethereum, but I would love to make a lot more money than I can by just doing my consensus stuff. So I'm going to do like this MEV thing that the kids are talking about, and I'm going to try and get as much juice from my block that I can get. But this is really hard. So you're asking somebody else to do it on your behalf. And what you're saying is, you know what, like this block building, which is really like a very, very core primitive of what validators or what miners do in consensus, is just now externalized to some parties that live outside of the network. And it's externalized in a way that, yeah, just do the whole block for me. And the block is big. You can fit a lot of transactions in it. You can do a lot of stuff. It's a lot of room. So the idea of PEPC, which is an acronym for Protocol Enforced Proposer Commitment, is to say maybe we can make that scheme more flexible. Maybe the block proposer can segment the block that they are selling, can commit to a certain shape of a contract that they enter into with these outside parties, and the protocol can be there to backstop these contracts. Because the way that PBS is set up today is all of this infrastructure lives off-chain. So the relays, the builders, none of that is seen by the protocol, and so there may be problems of liveness. If the relays go down, there are problems of trust because the relays are trusted. And so why couldn't we shift all of this trust and all of this liveness and all of this failure, backstop this by the protocol, because it has higher credibility? And so that was, let's say, I think it was pretty long, 10-minute nutshell of what Pepsi is. But yeah.
It's a cool name, though. You should start an agency for it.
It's a meme-driven economy. I'm just playing by the rules.
Are we going to get a
hate
Coke
the
one?
game, not the players. Sorry.
Are we going to Coke version of that one?
When do we see Diet Pepsi?
Diet. Yeah.
So this is proposer-enforced actions, right? So everything revolves around pinky promise made by the proposer, right?
Correct. Yeah. Right. So the proposer makes commitments. For instance, I'm going to use part of a block built by Philip. I'm going to use part of a block built by Juan. And if I fail to satisfy any of my commitments, the whole protocol will just ignore me, and the validity of my block depends on me satisfying this commitment that I entered into. And so it's a much stronger kind of property that you could get from systems like EigenLayer, where you can also enter into commitments, but which are more optimistic, because if you fail to do your commitments, you're slashed, so you lose money. But sometimes, if you can get $1 million and you're slashed 1,000, you're just going to go and get the $1 million or the $990,000 that you can get. So yeah, it's a way of essentially trying to make the protocol more aware of its commitments, have the protocol backstop these commitments, and offer more flexibility than the current PBS system can offer.
Interesting. So you have this kind of a data availability scheme that tells is the commitment has been
In a way,
ensured or
so
not.
data availability is a big part of it, but you also need the enforcement of a commitment. So both properties are definitely necessary.
But it's still an outside environment, right? The data availability, like even
It
if there's
depends.
anything.
You could have your commitments in a block, and that would also make the data availability, let's say, backstopped by the protocol or supported by the protocol. Yeah.
Right, right.
And all of this I'm saying is very theoretical because, again, we are trying to specify it a bit better. I think there's a lot of issues with it still, but it's more of a, I think, directionally correct, but potentially technically challenging thing.
So, well,
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, so for Pepsi, are these predicates or is it can it be more expressive than that?
My hope is that we can just reuse the EVM for these predicates. It's already there. People have learned how to use it very well. You have a lot of off-the-shelf libraries that can help you verify the type of programs that you write in it. So yeah, I don't mean to reinvent the wheel. I'm sure there will be like much smarter ways of doing this, maybe using Haskell or doing fancy stuff that would be more appropriate for the kind of commitment language that I'm looking for. But
So would it happen like in the EVM or just generally within Ethereum's execution environment?
I'm not
Or
sure.
like if
Yeah.
you had to kind of imagine, I guess.
I think it'd be more expressive if you had access to the same state as the execution engine of Ethereum has access to. And in that sense, you would then maybe not want to decouple it too much from the execution layer. But yeah.
so if I understand correctly, because like this is a bit new to me, so basically you're saying this commitment is the promise that the proposer makes to the builder to get access to the information, as in I will, I get access to this, but I will get back whatever, or it may even ask more expressive stuff like you have also to include this other transaction that has nothing to do with it, but I pay you with MEV that I'm extracting from the mempool.
Yeah, for instance. So PBS is a commitment. It's just a very simple one. It's you make the whole block for me. You get to keep the money that is left after you have sold it to me. And so how do you generalize these commitments to maybe larger things?
Nice.
Right, so I want to continue that conversation. Coming to you, Juan, you audited a credible commitment, a commitment scheme, which happens in off-chain and what you want to control is an on-chain. In between, you had a lot of questions on that one, how the hell a contract can actually know this, right? Which is the proposer commitment based on Pepsi. But could you explain a little bit like the issues, the challenges that you had, right? The kind of data availability, like how do you basically get that state outside? What sort of like how many proposers can come? Because there are 675,000, I think so, validators. Everything is BLS keys. There's no pre-compiled or anything. So what are the challenges that you face, like to codify, when you're auditing, some people write in the smart contracts and trying to verify a black box. And what was your take, and what you share to the world? How do you approach such kind of attempts?
Yeah, so verifying black boxes is hard. Yeah, so as I said earlier in the presentation, like when we encounter some sort of, so when we audit, we tend to stick to what's in scope, which it's usually like smart contract code. But of course, we wouldn't be doing a very good job if we wouldn't taking into account like how this smart contract interplays with the rest of the thing, be it another protocol or off-chain components such as relayers, right? So the way we find it's for us the most reliable way to try to fight these black boxes is usually through formalisms. So in particular in the PON, like we had, I remember when we started, like you look at the code, and when it's code that it's heavily depending on other stuff, like it's screaming back at you like I'm saying you nothing, like it's really hard to actually get a picture. It's very uneasy feeling of reading this, right? So
It's very different from a solidity audit. That's what you're saying. You need.
Sorry?
It's very different from a normal solidity audit. Just not looking for the bugs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's very not self-contained, and that increases the difficulty of the auditing by a large amount. Because otherwise everything is very pretty. You have your math. It's self-contained and very hermetic. And yes, I mean it's still hard, but it's in a way it's not that this is dishonest, but it's like just more transparent. So what we tend to do then is basically turn to formalisms, and in particular for the PON we did this mathematical model of the off-chain code, because I mean we were also looking at the off-chain code, but that's all. I mean that's too detailed, right? Too detailed and too subject to change as well. So we don't. I mean it's for us for our approach in that sense. It's way better to just snapshot in math what's supposed to be happen, on the others on the backstage, and then from there, and actually that helped massively to just say okay, and it's a very nice also communication exercise between the client and ourselves, because it's like it's not like we pull up this mathematical model off the sleeve and then you have to just deal with it. It's like, do you agree with it? And that enables a lot of back and forth conversation, which in turn it's also like it doesn't have like a deliverable per se, but to me that back and forth with the model was actually a huge step forward into actually understanding the on-chain code. So it's that was for me an invaluable tool in order to assess what was happening at the protocol level rather than at the on-chain only level.
May I just interject? I think this is actually exactly our experience as well. So we can't model everything, right? So we have to establish a ground of truth that is relative to that we are modeling, trying to verify what is going on, and that process itself, I think, is half of the value probably, because you clarify things that are not yet fully specified or in the air, or just kind of intuitively understood by the team, but not expressively communicated to the outside world. I think that is. So it resonates very well with us.
Yeah, and I also think that this kind of processes also blind you, the developers, to like towards not mistakes necessarily, but towards breaking implicit assumptions. So this makes it everything way more explicit. So it's also some sort of like blueprint. Like okay, we're iterating further the code, we're optimizing, we're putting in new features, but we have a common agreement on stuff works this way. There are only these issues and no others. So I also think it's a very nice shielding from to piggyback.
Would this work with a more of a property-based or invariant-based thinking, like what things actually happens on modeling that the structure that he said, what cannot change and what can be desired, things that we can expect from it's because it's a finite state. What's going to happen, right? That could be.
I mean, yeah, definitely. So the thing is that we chose math models because we wanted to not care about the implementation, since it was not we were not looking at the implementation. So in that sense was like the most. So invariants are. I mean, you can have like very general invariants like protocol-wide that don't speak about the code, but they tend to come quite often. They tend to emerge more from the code itself, and our can be like more related to the code, and here we wanted a very general description that just didn't take into account the code. So, but it can be done. Like I guess, and actually, like we could take the model and say, okay, what are the nice properties that the model should fulfill, and this could also like be some sort of invariance of the code, right? But also, it's a time-boxed effort. So, in that sense, I think it's also more efficient to just produce a model. And because also the model is like, okay, we have an understanding now. It's back and forth between you and us, and not between the code and the us, which is how you like take the invariance, I guess.
Yeah, I think I second to that. In the case of our assumptions we made on the specific actors, they are specifically modeled as, from our point of view, as a state transition, and we have in Haskell we have libraries where we can compose these tools. If that is if there is a way of taking that as a model that also the lower side basically maps into that, of course, is perfect, because there are always these issues of translating back and forth between the different levels, and as long as there are manual and there are assumptions that are not matched fully, horrible things can happen, basically.
I mean, shit happens.
all the time.
That's true.
Everything is as is. Right? That's me right first. So the next one to you, Philip. I want to pick a subject that you can fight with a lot of people. How do you create intents with the EVM spec, which is like you have like 100,000 opcode, not 100,000 opcodes, I'm just
I have
making
to
it
leave
out.
now.
Like how can you model such things, with open games? What do you think? What's your thoughts? Because it's a widely talked subject. And there are like attempts like doing with hooks and permits. These are being created for making UX better, but could also be now with the toolings like the actors who are dedicated to do that kind of services. It comes handy. Those UX experiment can be used for other things like create to. But what's your take on this?
Okay, stop me.
It's an open field.
Stop me if I get too long.
Yeah.
So there are several layers to it. So first of all, independently of the thing that we do.
I want to get it closer to an intent. That's what.
Yeah. So the thing is, I'm not on the level of implementing it, so I don't know the exact details. I'm not on that level of sophistication, obviously, as a caveat. But
we'll complicate it. Don't worry.
What I see from also having seen other kind of basically frameworks which are similar. If you think about complex auctions, you have a similar issue in some sense that you have to provide a bidding language that people can use. At the same time, you have to dock into an allocation engine that then does something with it. And the typical thing that you want is you can't just in a complex auction you can't just leave everything open because that makes it you can. Basically, you put all the computational complexity on the user. So what you want in the ideal case is a match between. But I'm not clear. There is a direct match between what user would care about, and also then that this is the dimension that the kind of downstream or upstream, depending on how you see it, builders, searchers will actually care about. And there is a question of how this actually will be translated. Okay, third point. That gap.
That means you say the builders and searchers have strong preferences.
They might have, yes. They have some builders.
That not aligned always with the user.
Yes, or it's not even on the same attributes and the characteristics basically. A very naive user might just care. There might be a service at some point, or the user just I want this thing to happen, and I want the price. And if you can guarantee that to me, I'm totally fine with that. I don't care about the rest basically. That's not necessarily the dimensions we talk about at the moment. And that example is also good because there would be a big gap between, a gap between the user side and what happens then upstream. And then the question, third level, is who is actually filling that gap, right? How does it happen? And I would say, if there are risk guarantees, for instance, then the real question is who's carrying that risk? Is there a tendency for kind of centralization happening, or a possibility that service providers which have a lot of incoming bids can aggregate, can also smooth, and so on. Last point, and I stop, is how does the risk actually get aggregated? So if a user wants a transaction to happen, what happens with the kind of states its intents? What is happening with that? What's the kind of feedback he actually gets back also? And who's carrying risk of implementing it? If you're guaranteeing that it gets implemented, who's then carrying that over? Do builders then need to bid on more than they would normally do now? There are lots of questions up there as well.
What about the second order effects of certain things? Like, for example, I'm picking on a topic like backrunning is being widely touted as the go-to way for doing many things, but you cannot if you take the whole space, it's a Pareto superior. You cannot have something without someone else is losing, right? So backrunning will help the guy who actually sent the transaction, but when you arbitrage, someone else will lose some other side. So
yeah, true. I mean, that's a general economic lesson. If it comes to risk, for instance, that we know some entities are better at taking risk and should be basically taking up risk, but in the context of a decentralized system, there is an additional question: is that the right point where it should actually happen, right? Or is it actually leading to other problems down the road? And I think these are issues that are very, very complex, obviously, that coming back to what I said initially, without having specific interactive models of what these layers actually are interacting with, where I mentioned this before, the three layers, user, builder, and proposer. How do builders actually bid on both sides, right? And this is, I don't know the answer, but I think it's, we need research, and I think the good thing about that whole space that many people are involved in trying to provide pieces of the puzzle and also thinking about what will be the consequences of that.
Interesting. Anyone want to ask say something exactly opposite of what you said.
So you were saying about so the searchers and their preferences it may not be possible to match the user's intent.
That's not what I said. What I said is basically there's a mismatch possibly between the attributes user care about and the attributes then other people in that or other players in that chain actually care about. That's the one. And the question is, how does this translation actually work in practice? Who's providing it? Is it necessary? I don't know. Maybe maybe I'm completely off, and maybe the users are totally fine with the kind of things that are discussed at the moment, or no different user interfaces are needed. I don't know. It would strike me as odd because I've seen it in other cases in other industries where this is needed, but of course I don't know the answer yet.
I think that probably a case, like an example of this without even going to intents is you submit a transaction with a very low gas fee when reside amount. Like there are people that could include your transaction, but it's against their set of incentives to do so. So you go ahead.
Or maybe you can throw what you want to do as a cold data or something like that, but then you just this kind of commit transaction, just small transactions which will not reveal, but you can pick it up from some side and then do it. So, interesting. Thanks. All right. Anything?
I think I'm camping on the credibility part of the panel. So I will say that with intents, we have to be careful that we preserve the credibility of how Ethereum is today. So when I send a transaction and when I sign it with my ECDSA signature and I send it to the global mempool, it's kind of credible because the global mempool is seen as this place that has all the transaction. People can figure out if I'm being censored. The signature is all that the protocol needs to execute my transaction. So it does give me like a fairly censorship resistant way and credible way to do something on the protocol. When I do intent stuff, I need more layers to kind of go through my transaction, which introduces more choke points. And the real question to me is, can you get these layers to credibly commit to mechanisms that treat users fairly, that don't censor, or that don't extract economic rent from these intents? So yeah, just like a word of warning on the types of dangers that I see with intents in general.
I'm going to send that question then, because it's quite often that we also wrestle with. When we internally look at the designing the mechanisms, the first thing that we take as Ethereum as a good stranger, like there's a concept of good stranger, right? In economics, like it can tell secrets to that person, and he will not do any harm, and he will not use it against it. And the way that is like Ethereum as a chain is as a good stranger, right? It can take it will execute exactly what you said because of the EVM, and it can execute it. But you tell that person in this way the contracts, but before you tell someone else, then it may have very counterproductive results. So hearing about your thesis, this kind of incomplete information markets, that's what we have, right? It's a lot of layers because we're still progressing into a complete tooling set around every aspects of the coordination. How do you, you're championing this effort of aligning like a protocol, seeing like a protocol, what's your basic proposition to the ecosystem? What should we take it from that thesis? Like what should we look into it?
Right, so I guess my thesis is not novel by any means, but it's the idea that it's already hard enough to align the people who are running your protocol, which are the miners or validators. Like they will sandwich you if you let your transaction open to be sandwiched. They will backrun, they will front run, they will do potentially play zero-sum games with what you send to them. They might even try to attack the protocol more directly on the consensus side. So yeah, there's a lot of things that they can do, and these are the people that we have control over. And the whole remainder of this supply chain, like from the wallets to the intents to the bundlers to like this network that was shown in one of the presentations before, there's not that much that we can do, but we can hope to create structures on the protocol that don't make things worse or that don't have negative externalities, let's say downstream. And we can try to propel that message to say, whatever you do when you are building builders or when you're building bundlers or whatever, you should try to at least preserve the basic properties that the protocol is trying to preserve, because if you're building this thing on top, then you become the choke point.
Right. So before we wrap, we'll have one more shot to take. I'll make it very short. Runtime verification has been involved in formal verification for a long time, but it's very important in Ethereum lifecycle. When the DEXs came, the Cambrian explosion of DEX, you did the formal verification of V1 of Uniswap. You did the formal verification of the POS Casper protocol. Did the formal verification of RANDAO, which is the basic of the randomness. And then Ethereum deposit contract, which our intense accumulator is based upon. You did also that one, the formal verification. Now you're doing another formal verification for intents, a general kernel, right? What's your thoughts? Like, you're there every time there's a huge explosion happening and you're verifying it. Tell us about it. What do you look at on this one?
I mean, I can tell you that verifying, from a personal perspective, is a very nice project to be in. We're in the early stages of doing this. So as much as like big conclusions so far, there aren't many, but it has led to. It's leading to a very exciting work. So both, I guess, I think it's a very nice protocol to verify, especially because now with Andreas' talk, and like what would you say, like you're minimizing a lot the protocol, the kernel, the core infrastructure.
It's only 400 lines.
Exactly.
It's only 400 lines. Come on, you can do it.
Yes, definitely, and you can brand it better. The file is 400 lines. Like we're not doing any standardization or whatever, right? So yeah. I think it's a very suitable project for this. It also deals with a lot of low-level, very non-trivial algorithmia and data structure. So it's also a very nice candidate for humanize. It's the kind of environment in which humanize are prone to make mistakes. It fits. It fits almost every tick, and also from our technological side, it's bringing a lot of nice developments of speed, of great insights into how do we want to keep building our technology stack. And actually there are things happening there because again talking about our K approach, right? And it's so I think perhaps some people look at KVM as this one tool to do bytecode verification, and it's it's an instance of a tool that allows you to do verification, right? So one thing that we're seeing that's happening, and it's actually extremely exciting, is that we come up with strategies with heuristics or with improvements on our KVM tool, but then these improvements can actually be generalized to the whole K framework. So then this means that languages like, for instance, C or what have you, are actually inheriting the benefits of formally verifying an Ethereum project, right? And this also speaks a lot about what do we have in our hands in the blockchain space, right? I don't think there's any other field in the world that's driving in this sense so fast, and that's so incentivized to apply heavily formal methods. And I think, it's very nice on its own, but sometimes I'm a bit skeptical in the sense that, it's very nice that you're developing a lot of tools, right? But it's some sort of staying here, right? And it's which is perfect, great, but it's also, I love to see when the field also drives its discoveries outside of the blockchain space and sort of gives back to the world, right? It's, I don't know. It reminds me a bit of this space race, right? You would do crazy technology just for the sake of getting to the moon, which normal people don't care about, and then that would reflect on their lives greatly. So
then you get the fry pans with the Teflon.
Exactly, yeah. and cold bars and yeah.
Any takes?
Wonderful work.
Thank you very much.
I agree.
Still is an ASIC software. The
staking contract, I think, is the contract on Ethereum that has the most Ether in it, right? So
yes, it is a good thing that's verified.
Scary as well.
50 billion. 50 billion. Right. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming. Thanks for all panelists.
Thank you very much.